Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Island Jazz Chat. This day we have with us a brilliant musician. I knew him for about 15 years. He's playing some gigs here in Port of Spain, and he's migrated now to Canada, and he's been doing some fabulous things, including taking our national culture, Tobago culture, the tambourine drum, but he's also doing some important work in terms of making sure that calypso is understood out there in the diaspora. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Jesse Ryan.
Man, Nigel, it's a pleasure to be here, man. Thank you
Yeah,
so
thanks.
much.
Not a problem. Thanks for this, right? I had to restart my podcast. My podcast was on a slight hiatus for a while there because connections and the people who wanted to talk weren't willing to talk. But I'm
Hmm.
glad that you're here. And
Yeah,
as I said, I've been following your career. Trinidad is not blessed necessarily with a million and one great saxophone players, but you certainly stood out among the crowd way back then at the famous Cafe de Ibiza stage. And I remember that you had attempted to go to Berkeley. And tell me about your career in Canada, because I know that you ended up at Humber College. Just give me a little short
exactly.
synopsis.
For sure, as you mentioned, I was studying in the States before. Had a short stint at Berkeley, and my intention was to head back to the States to study. And I ended up crossing paths with Lionel Lewis, the amazing
Yes.
drummer with Snacky Puppy.
Hmm.
Um, and I met him at Jazz on the Greens,
There
right?
you go.
Met him at Jazz on the Greens. And he was
Yeah.
like, you should come to Toronto. And I checked it out. It worked out fine. I went and I finished my undergrad at Humber College. I'm actually teaching at Humber College right now.
Excellent. Excellent.
Um, and I've had the pleasure of running a Afro Caribbean jazz ensemble at
Mm.
Humber College for the last 3 years, where we focus on the music of English and French speaking Caribbean composers and the folkloric and sort of jazz infused styles that come from the region. When I was a student at Humber, we had lots of like Latin jazz ensembles, but
Mhm.
nothing from the English and French speaking Caribbean, which there are lots of connections. So, I mean, that's been a large part of my artistic journey over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years.
Mhm.
Um,
Wonderful.
yeah,
I
so
know something similar was done at Berkeley with Ron Reed, and
exactly.
I think more recently with Jack Schwartzbach. So I'm
Yeah,
happy that they're doing that in Canada because I'm a huge
absolutely.
fan of this thing called Caribbean jazz. I
Yeah.
speak English, so of course my focus has been on the kind of Kaiso jazz.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you're taking that lead and moving that in the Canadian space. And congrats for that, and kudos
Thank you so much. Thank
all
you
the way
so
through for
much.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I'm also aware of, in addition to, of course, making records, and I'm sure that you have future recordings,
Yeah.
we discovered a connection between yourself and one of the pioneer calypsonians in Trinidad and Tobago. You talked about calypso folkloric music as part
Yeah.
of the Afro-Caribbean bed of music that you're going to use to jazzify. Let's just
Yeah.
say those words,
Yeah.
right? Of course, the mighty bomber, I understand, is your grandfather,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And there were these connections and links, and I know you had may have done some arrangements, and there was this connection, this kind of renaissance of what
Yeah.
our music can be, certainly here in Trinidad, and how we can make
Yeah.
it global as it was. But I understand that you're putting on a campaign
Yeah.
within the space, probably Canada and probably the rest of the world, for all I know,
Yeah.
to spread the word of calypso jazz or calypso all the same. Tell me about
Mhm.
that, please, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I need to take you back a little bit because there's some context for this. In 2023, I got an opportunity to present some of my grandfather's music, and it was part of a Black History Month uh, program that was put on by Joy Bullen, who is the cousin of the amazing pianist here in Toronto, Eddie Bullen, who I think you've met many times at Down at Jazz and the Greens.
Eddie
And
Brilliant.
so yeah,
Yes,
so
yes, Grenadian heritage, yes.
exactly. And so I got the opportunity to present this ensemble, and in the process of writing the music, or rather arranging the tune, because I took seven of my grandfather's calypsos and one from Spoiler. The Spoiler was one of his mentors. I realized that it was really hard to do
Mhm.
calypso research, and that there was this big gap in between what me, a Trinidadian, knew, and my grandfather's a calypsonian. There's so much about even his history I didn't know. I didn't
Mhm.
know that he traveled to Canada in 1967 to perform in Montreal at Expo 67,
Expo 67, yeah.
right, which was Canada's centennial celebration, and it's when Canada declared themselves a multicultural nation.
Mhm.
And so he was commissioned to write a calypso called Expo 67, and he was also invited about a month after from Montreal down to Toronto to perform at the very first Caribana, which happened on Center Island. And there's a record that was made of that concert, or one of the concerts. Um, he's on it. Now, there's rumors that he actually didn't make it to the concert, and I'm still trying to get to the bottom of that. But
Uh,
nevertheless, that was history that I wasn't aware of. So I started digging and doing more research and realized that there is a need to preserve the history, to bring forward these stories. And there's an excellence that the combos from the 60s and the 70s have, man. The
mm,
musicianship is on a different level, and I'm still inspired by that. And so I started the Kaiso Street Society, which is an arts organization. We're doing three things: research, we're doing performances, and presenting the music to audiences. Across generations, because we want to focus on the multi-generational way of bringing forward the music. Because a lot of times calypso is considered old music,
good
right? But
music,
it's
yeah.
it's very much relevant for us today, at least culturally. Um, and then we're doing advocacy and education around calypso. So
Mm,
this is our very first Calypso History Month campaign. It's called Calypso in the Air, and it's
mm.
meant to infuse everyday spaces with calypso. There's various parts of the campaign. If you want to, we can get into it now. If we could, we could do
Let's
it.
have a conversation. We're
Awesome.
chatting.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we have various things. So the campaign runs from October 1st to the end of the month. Um, and we'll have a launch event on October 1st. It'll be an online launch event. And
Mm,
then throughout the month, one of the main parts of the campaign is a curated playlist. So we've
mm,
curated four different playlists, different themes. We look at the foundations of calypso. That's a 1 hour playlist. We look at women in calypso. We look at calypso in key cities like New York and London and Toronto. And then
mm.
we look at calypso sort of fusion in the diaspora, so like calypso jazz and other
I'm
forms
interested in
of,
that last one.
yeah, different forms. So we've curated the playlist, and we're partnering with businesses, cafes, restaurants, bookstores, businesses that usually play music in their place of business every single day. And so
Yes,
we're
yes.
partnering with them. They'll play our playlist, and we'll drive traffic to their business, and with their customers
Mm.
introduced to what we're doing, and it's exposed to calypso.
It's very innovative. I've again, boy, kudos, boy. Going to Canada. I mean, I don't mean to be a snob or any kind of thing like that, but I've always suggested that our artists need to see the broader horizon. That may mean simple things like just go abroad, spend as much as your visa would allow you to spend in that country, but see the country, hear the country, but understand certain things like that campaign, that notion of
Yeah,
a campaign and doing the business and the kind of, I wouldn't say bartering, but the kind of cross pollination between
exactly.
businesses that have audiences existing and
Yeah,
introducing them to the music. Those are kind of simple ideas that are born out of experience.
yeah,
And again, kudos to you for that. In terms of you set up a playlist. Of course, in this modern iteration, a playlist is always associated with an online DSP, the digital supply like a Spotify,
yes,
Apple Music. Are you
yes.
going to put your playlist on those platforms, or is
We're
it
not
exclusive?
we're not going to put it
Tell
on
me
the on
why.
the on the platforms. So
Licensing.
there's the licensing challenge, right? We would have to upload the actual track. We are not the owners of the music, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we'd have to get licensing permissions for that. The other thing is that we want to make it accessible for the businesses, right? Make it easy for them. So
Mm-hmm.
we want to make it easy for them so that we'll create the playlist. All we have to do, we deliver the playlist. They have a Wi-Fi connection and they play it. That's
Mm-hmm.
it.
That's it.
And so there is sort of an adapted creative element to it. So I'm working with a friend of mine who actually we went to both primary school and high school together, who lives in Toronto. His name is Matthew Charles. He's a
Mm-hmm.
DJ, so he's the one that's doing the mixes for us. It's a collaboration between the organization and the
Mm-hmm.
work that he's already doing in Toronto as a DJ.
Would you allow that playlist to be, again, it may be a licensing challenge,
Yeah.
but to have that playlist available to Trinidad businesses or Caribbean businesses?
Absolutely, absolutely. Nigel. One of the things that I think sets Kaiso Street apart is that from the beginning of the organization, I have a diasporic lens when it comes to calypso. Trinidad as the ancestral home of calypso, but then we look at four various important calypso hubs. New York, right, one of the first places that calypso was recorded,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and there was like a 10 year period within 30s, 40s, where
The techno recordings.
the
Yeah.
exactly those are the first commercial, like the first calypso record deals, came
Yeah.
happened in New York, right? And then of
Mm-hmm.
course during the Windrush era in London. So
Mm-hmm.
London is another key city, and then of course a lot of people don't know this. Montreal in Canada was like the first calypso hub in Canada for
Oh, okay.
in the Little Burgundy district in Montreal. It was like
Mm-hmm.
40% black neighborhood, lots of different clubs, and one of
Mm-hmm.
the main people on the scene there was Lord Caressa. Lord
I heard
Caressa,
that
the
name.
club,
Yes, I
yeah,
understand he was important to Canadian calypso, or calypso in Canada, I
absolutely.
should say.
Exactly, and he had a radio program for 2 years. I think 1946 and 1948, I believe,
Yes.
on CBC.
Mm.
And so I mean, Afro Caribbean man, Afro Trinidadian man, migrating to Canada and getting a show on TBC and ran for 2 years, and that's pretty significant around that time. That's pre Trinidad getting independence, pre Canada's immigration
Laws that change up
law
everything.
change up, right? So
Mhm.
so is an important thing. So and then once Caribana happened, I mean, there's a lot of things that made that made Toronto, the focal point. I only learned this recently. I went to a trip like up in Cobalt, Ontario, and I realized that they were moving all the gold from Cobalt down to Toronto. So
Mhm.
anyway, so a lot of people settled in Toronto and Ontario, and then Toronto became a hub. There's so much calypso history that happened just in
Mhm.
Toronto alone, So
Yeah.
there's so we've identified Trinidad, New York, London, Toronto as four
Mm.
major calypso hubs that we have this diasporic lens. So yes, long answer to the question. We'd love to collaborate with Trinidadian businesses on this.
That'd be amazing. It's very much amazing. Well, something you don't know, probably my listeners don't know. I went to University of Toronto, right?
Hey, I didn't know that.
It was Mississauga at the time. It was called Erindale College from 8 to 84. And actually worked on the radio station there, right? Token. I wouldn't finish the rest of that sentence, but I was there playing music and nobody else wanted to play. But this is the era of Prince and Michael Jackson. And you're
Mm-hmm.
hearing everything else. I say, hello, 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 let's do something here. But Toronto as a hub, as a kind of a space for a
Yeah,
diaspora, certainly in my eyes, it was beginners of a diaspora. I knew some families who had been there from very early on.
yeah,
Johnny Kion is a name that sticks out very prominently in my mind. I think I'm friends with his social media friends with his family and that kind of stuff. And I think he may have been important in the creation of Caribana. But I know there was a space that people did go to, right? That
yeah,
famously Trinidad Theatre Workshop launched Dream on Monkey Mountain at the same Expo 67.
yeah.
And of course, SO Triple A was in it. Triple A was a local steel band.
Silvan, yeah, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So that I'm aware that the Canadian space was important, certainly for the spread of Trinidad music. Let's just use
yeah.
that for the beginning, and
Mm-hmm.
Caribbean music. But you identified within your Kaiso Street, there were like four elements. And as I said, one thing that sticks with me and kind of aligns with our show
Yeah.
is the fusion idea, the kind of
Mm-hmm.
Caribbean jazz idea and thing. I
Yeah.
had Anthony Pierre on my show, the last person we had on our show, Anthony Pierre, and he spoke about his beginnings in Canada and his understanding of what took place and that kind of stuff. What
Yeah.
is your perspective? Of course, you've come up probably a generation after Anthony, but
Yeah.
what is your vision, understanding of the Caribbean jazz space in
Yeah.
Canada, in Toronto, as you've seen it?
Yeah. I mean, somebody like Anthony Pierre has been, a staple on the scene. And then there've been other bands as well. Um, my perspective is that there is an audience for it, but there aren't a lot of artists here in Toronto that are necessarily carrying on the Kaiso jazz, right? So if you say Kaiso jazz, that term is usually means that you have a Trinidadian connection in some way. Usually,
Usually, yeah,
right?
usually, yeah. Mhm.
Um, and so Toronto is also very close to New York, right? So I find that you can find more of the guys in New York than here in Toronto.
Correct, yeah.
Um, my perspective though is that if you take a genre like high life or like Afrobeats, those things had ancestral home in on the continent, African continent, but it didn't develop on the African continent.
No, the diaspora actually, from what I understand, so
Exactly.
is Afrobeats. The diaspora in London were critical to the
Exactly.
explosion of Afrobeats worldwide. Yes.
Absolutely. Right. I mean,
Mhm.
even if you look at reggae, right?
Mhm.
Reggae's the rise of reggae and somebody like Bob Marley
Bob
was
Marley in
also
England, in
a
London.
diasporic connection, right?
Very much so,
So
very much so. Mhm.
so part of the work that I am, and this is some of this is aspirational, and we're still a young organization, and we just finished put together our strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years.
Mhm.
But part of the advocacy is that, and you used the word renaissance earlier. We wanted to start a calypso renaissance, right?
Yes.
Um,
Mhm.
Calypso in terms of the writers,
Mhm.
calypso in terms of a true appreciation for the pioneers of the music. We want
Mhm.
to bring back the melodic, harmonic content,
Mhm.
the sense that calypso is music for social change,
Mhm.
and I know that because of the strength of the diaspora, that doesn't have to happen in the ancestral home of Trinidad and Tobago. All right,
Understood. And
right.
Faye, that excellent point in terms of recognizing the power of the diaspora. But keep
Yeah,
going. Mhm.
yeah. Um, there are so many voices and musicians all around the world from Trinidad who are part of the diaspora, and we're singing the same song, right? We want calypso to take its rightful place, and we
Mhm.
want younger generations to dig into the music and study the music the way that previous generations did.
Mhm.
The challenge is that there is a generation gap in that you can't walk into a space in Trinidad or maybe in most parts of the world and hear authentic calypso, right? So part of our vision and mission is to uh, present and expose people to authentic calypso, right?
Calypso.
In all its forms, right? Because there's calypso or calypso jazz, Kaiso
Mhm.
jazz, and then
Mhm.
there's Kaiso-ish
Mhm.
jazz, right? Or jazzy
Jazzy
Kaiso,
Kaiso. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
I know it. We
Right?
have a picture of that. We have a lot of that. Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
And so if you look at the French speaking Caribbean and the Spanish speaking Caribbean, they've done an excellent job of preserving their traditions.
Yes. Boca
Um,
Ballet. Yes, correct. Mhm.
right? They've done an excellent job of passing it on from generation to generation. That doesn't mean that there are superficial versions of the traditions, but by
Mhm.
and large, there's always new generations digging into the traditions, taking it, putting their own spin on it. I find that in Trinidad and the English speaking Caribbean, we tend to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Um, and 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 this is the thing is that I've been doing a lot of clips for research, and one of the themes that has come up a lot is the idea of the crossover. We've been
Yes.
obsessed with
Why?
the idea of
That's why Spooker
crossover,
was invented.
right?
It was
But
to
even
cross
if
over.
and
Mhm.
I thought that the crossover happened in the 70s with clips with soca. But if you
Mhm.
go way back, there's one of the earliest crossovers that happened. The crossover is always influenced by
Commercial.
commercialism,
Correct.
right?
Yes. Mhm.
One of the big first crossovers was that change from calypsos being sung in patois to
Mhm.
English,
English.
right?
Correct. Yeah. Mhm.
The upper class English speaking didn't want calypsos to be sung in
In
French
patois.
in patois anymore because
Mhm.
they couldn't understand it. It was a threat to them, and that was around the same time when calypso tents were forming, the commercialization of the music itself,
Yeah.
right? So there was a slow sort of transition from patois to English, and
Mhm.
this idea of crossing over, and I think that was one of the first big transitions, right?
Mhm.
That idea of a crossover that wasn't necessarily a musical crossover where we're trying to cross pollinate with other popular
Mhm.
forms, but the spirit of the music was always in transition by what's popular and
Mhm.
where's the demand, right? And of course, you have also the crossovers happening, you know, in every decade
I, I, I
after
I
that.
think in beyond what you just said, and you're
Yeah.
preaching to the choir. This is excellent what you've done. Of course, the idea of getting to America beyond Lovey's going in 1912, and of course
Yeah.
coming back to Decca Recordings,
Yeah.
Roaring Lion and Attila the Hun going to New York and doing some radio programs, and of course
Yeah.
Ralph McDonald's father, some of these people being resident in New York,
Yeah.
and as you said, making records on RCA Records, on Decca Records, and
Yeah.
Brunswick. which were the majors at the time,
And
was
Cook did
very
some important work too. Cook Records.
yeah, well, yeah, and Cook, of course, famously being here in Trinidad,
Yeah,
it's very important stuff you're discussing there. But
yeah,
the idea of crossover, and as I said, I'm a stupid fan of this thing called Kaiso jazz, and I've seen its development, heard its development. I recognize you and other musicians who flirt with the idea of introducing calypso elements. As much as I have a definition of calypso being a lyricist and a performance art, right? You've already identified that the critical elements in terms of melody and harmony that make calypso music, as it
yeah,
was. It's just
yeah,
a form of music, right?
yeah.
And being a musician, you're able to take that and infuse or add a language of jazz to calypso to,
Right.
I guess, to make it to find a new audience, right?
Yeah,
The idea of crossover, as I said, of course, the commercial aspect is important, but creating a brand new audience, I think, is so critical. And I think what you've been doing, certainly with your album that you released a couple of years ago,
mm-hmm.
and what you're discussing here with your Kaiso Street Society, I know I'm going to get the name wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think it is important in terms of building audiences because at the end of the day,
Yeah,
we're still niche in the world in
for
terms of
sure,
all,
for sure.
right? So
Yeah,
it's an idea, but you've insisted upon the idea of presenting authentic calypso, right?
yeah,
I'm just curious about, is there a market, a potential market for that calypso jazz? Because as I said, I know that you are versed in calypso jazz in terms of
yeah,
performance and recordings.
yeah.
Is there a market for calypso jazz in terms of your research and in terms of your development going forward?
Well, I mean, when you talk about market, it always comes down to how you package something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I would say is there a market for Kaiso jazz? Is there a market for Afro Caribbean stories? Yes. Is there a market for world music? Yes. Right.
Mm-hmm.
There are far more world music festivals than there are jazz festivals. For
Yes,
example,
I've
right,
discovered that. Yes,
right.
yes, yeah.
So it's just it really boils down to how you market it, and that's one of the things I've been looking at recently. Really how you brand and market what you're doing, but also, just to shift the conversation slightly, and I'll bring it back. One of
Mm-hmm.
the most important things that I think a lot of people aren't talking about right now is the role of artists in society. Like, forget the music for a second,
Yes.
right? And this is something that I've heard Wynton Marsalis talk about this, right? What's the role of the musician, right? And for me, the role of the musician is to help the community make sense of the
Mm-hmm.
reality in which we live in. That's
Yeah.
one of the roles of the artist. It's also to um, bring the community together, and in
Mm-hmm.
some sense, the artist is remembering history, right? Kind of like that role of the griot, the
Mm-hmm.
bringing forward of the stories, but also the artist has also like a prophetic role too, sometimes looking forward, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
everybody functions in that role, but
Yes.
and I think for me as an artist, that's how I see myself. I want to go back into the history. I want to remember where we've come from. I want to bring those stories forward.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the stories take different medium, right? Sometimes it's in a song, sometimes it's an instrumental thing, sometimes it's a film,
Yes.
sometimes it's research, right? So it's about finding multiple ways to bring the community together.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, specifically the Afro Caribbean community, or the Afro Trinidadian, or just Trinidadian community.
Trinidad community. Mm-hmm.
I we have so many stories that are still to be told. Like in the research that I've been doing, I've been talking to so many incredible calypso arrangers and musicians, and it's the stories they tell me. I'm like, this should be a film.
Yeah.
Like, this should be a movie. So yeah, I think I might be getting away from the question a little bit, but
Mhm.
yeah, that's what I would say.
What I'm going to suggest, and it's a chat, so you may meander a little bit, but
Sure,
we
sure.
always come back and think.
Yeah,
One of the things that I'm getting from you is this notion of legacy,
for
right? And it's a
sure.
thing that as I'm getting to my age, it becomes more and more important, right?
Yeah,
You talk about, we don't know these stories. Simple things like, well, tell me about your band, tell me about your career, tell me your biography.
yeah,
When our artists die, nobody knows. I got phone calls from people, please tell me about this particular artist who recently died. And I was shocked because I thought this was like an understood thing that people knew the stories of artists, right?
yeah,
Our stories are those kind of things that have to have to have to last forever. The kind of dichotomy is that we have music annually in terms of calypso and more recently
Yeah.
soca that is discarded
Yes.
annually, right?
Yes.
You make a record, they put out a couple hundred records for the season, and if
Yeah.
you're not in the top 5 or top 10,
Yeah.
that's it. The
Yeah.
artists themselves don't even go back and play those songs, right? So that the idea of sustaining that legacy and sustaining a catalog
Yeah.
disappears. So some artists who have released 30, 40 records over a period of time, if none of them were hits, in the sense that they didn't win a road march or they're not in the top
Yeah.
five,
Yeah.
one would suggest, well, their career is over, but they may have been very innovative in terms of their creation and what they did, right?
Yeah.
But I'm liking what I'm hearing in terms of your idea of preserving
Yeah.
musically the heritage and, of course, utilizing the Kaiso Street Society, I know I've seen that on screen, to get and to retain
Yeah.
that authenticity and to retain the kind of legacy of the
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
Again, this is a brilliant conversation. I'm glad I restarted the podcast with this conversation because young, fine minds are important, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm considering also the other aspect is that Trinidad is what I call a diaspora nation.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Puerto Rico as one of those places where there are Puerto Ricans who stay on the mainland, but
Yeah.
there are Puerto Ricans all over the states, and they're very proud of their Puerto Rican heritage, right?
Yeah.
I think Jamaicans, we all know a Jamaican is a Jamaican
Absolutely.
anywhere on the planet, right?
Exactly.
Trinidad has to become that, right? And
Yeah.
I'm not. There may be a consideration that Trinidad is losing its finest minds, its infamous brain drain that is
Mm-hmm.
happening. But there's a new generation of persons like yourself, who have gone abroad but have never forgotten where they're from. There was a
Absolutely.
there was a generation before that turned their backs and went away and never looked backwards. No
Yeah.
sense of nostalgia. We, I'm seeing this modern generation are doing everything to make sure that they retain
Yeah.
as well as adapt for a brand new space. So
Yeah.
as I said, you're in Toronto playing music, creating music that internally maybe, well, this is just calypso. Externally, they may be saying this is something new.
You
This
know
is
what?
something fused.
You know
Go
what,
ahead.
Nigel? That's such a an interesting gap and something I always look at. One of the challenges I've faced with the Kaiser Society is explaining the vision
Mm-hmm.
to people within the diaspora,
Mm,
where we've gotten so accustomed to discarding our own stories, our
mm-hmm.
own histories, and discarding our own people. Right?
Wow. Yes.
There's a really colonialism still has a very strong hold on Trinidad and Tobago and
Say it again.
across the Caribbean, right?
Yes.
Every
Yes.
time every time I come home, I'm faced with it and I grapple with it and I'm actually shocked at how much it still affects us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um and so again, one of the part of the advocacy that we're doing at Kaiser Society is that decolonialization work. It's challenging work because it's so ingrained in us um, to discard a mighty bomber, to
Yes.
discard a Lord Kitchener, even though we have places named after these men,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe once or twice a year we would look back at these men and women, I should say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who've really, you know, over decades, and actually there's over 100 years of recorded music calypso now.
Yes. Yes.
Over 100 years formed the collective consciousness of a nation through music and art. I am always baffled, or I'm pleasantly surprised rather, when we grow up hearing certain sayings,
Mm-hmm.
and then you discover later on that that was something some calypsonian said
Said
in
yeah.
1940 something, and
Yeah.
it became part of the collective consciousness of the
Mm-hmm.
nation, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we've gotten so accustomed to discarding those things in pursuit of uh in
In
pursuit
pursuit of
of
the new,
in
in
pursuit of
pursuit
the
of
new.
trying to cross over. That notion of crossing over, I think, has been critical to our music development, right? Because always want
Absolutely.
something new. Of course, we're also looking for a kind of sense of external validation. So
Absolutely.
that, of course, if you make it in the States, so if somebody sing of the famous new thing now is you get a hip hop artist to jump on your song and in the remix, and you think, well, that is it. And the hip hop artist is on a label and he's just doing this as a side project. He didn't even put it on his label. It's not an official release. I say
Right.
you've done nothing. You have nothing.
Right.
You're still in the
Right.
same position.
Well, what's interesting, going back to calypso culture, right? And this
Mm-hmm.
is a bit of an insight into Trinidadian culture and history that popped out at me. If you look at calypsonians, they have two types of names, right?
Mm-hmm.
the first, so you have the mighty, the growling tiger,
Mm-hmm.
the mighty, this, the terrors,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have the other names that um, Lord Kitchener.
Lords.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
right, so you have the terrors, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have the noble, right?
Okay.
And I
Yeah.
think that approach, I mean, this is, later on you have people under their own names and
Mm-hmm.
different things,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
by and large, those are the two categories. And to me, those are archetypes of a kind of way of being in Trinidad,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
you either get by or achieve or go up this status uh,
Mm-hmm.
pole by becoming noble and respected, whether through wealth or education or whatever, or you take your opportunity and take what's yours.
Take what's
In
yours. Yeah. They fight for
right,
it.
you
Yes.
fight for it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think we still see those archetypes, and I think the thing about it too is that there's man, I'm trying to, I'm biting my tongue here because I experienced something earlier in the year when I was at home in Trinidad. I
Mm-hmm.
was at a national event. Let's just say that I was a
Okay.
national event, and I had to end up leaving the event early.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I needed to because the energy that was bouncing around was just too much. Too
Mm-hmm.
many egos. Everybody thinks that they're the best things in life, but and that's not to take away anything from anybody. I was there because I was, a legit fan of so many of the people in that space.
Yes.
But I think one of the challenges that we face, and this is coming from a colonial thing, is that we tend to lean into reputation
Mm-hmm.
more than character.
Okay.
You
I hear
know,
you. Mm.
and I think it's important for us as a nation to get back to character.
Character.
Character. What can I actually offer? What can I contribute? How am I building my community? How am I sharpening myself to be an asset to the people
Mm.
that I'm connected to? Not my reputation. Not you will have to respect me because I have
Mm.
a title. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's such a colonial thing.
As I said, I'm happy we're having this conversation because I'm getting a perspective of a younger person, admittedly, who sees the world obviously different from I've been around for a while. I'm
Yeah.
not necessarily rigid. I'm always open to new ideas.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I kind of think that there's certain things that are fixed, but I've
Mm.
discovered even those things are not fixed per se, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think, as I said, I think what is critical in terms of the idea of reputation, what you've just suggested in terms of reputation versus character,
Mm-hmm.
I think those are important archetypes and things because the calypso, our history in terms of our music industry, of course, being tied so dramatically, more than 70% of the music created in Trinidad is tied to carnival, right? So that creates a kind of space and a kind of attitude and a kind of
Mm.
way that we do things
Yeah.
that is dominant. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, I am trying to eke out a space about those other persons who have decided to innovate,
Yeah.
right? To try something new, to think differently, as it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, in terms of and to improvise, hence the
Yeah.
notion of a jazz musician.
Yeah.
But in terms of a lot of the people I speak to on this podcast all live abroad, right?
Mm.
So that because the business of music here in Trinidad it may be it's going to be very difficult. But I
Mm.
think also the vision of Trinidad may be also very narrow, very
Mm-hmm.
siloed.
Yeah.
So you are able to see a broader vision. So even with your little knowledge and your content in
Yeah.
terms of your grandfather's heritage and your
Mm-hmm.
understanding and you growing up in Trinidad and playing music that you knew and liked,
Yeah.
once you're out there, I learned that when I was in Canada back in 1980. The things that we took for granted in Trinidad, I mean, stupid things like public displays of affection. People say,
Yeah.
but get a room now. Then you go to Toronto, people are kissing each other on the street, and then
Yeah.
you realize you're a nobody in a very large space. And I think that is
Mm.
necessary for
Mm-hmm.
us to develop and to create something new, right? But
And
at the
for
same,
me, sorry,
yeah,
go
go ahead.
ahead. No,
No,
I
you,
was gonna say that experience also made me go look inward, right,
mm,
and also look back because it didn't matter what I would do, what I did. I was that guy from Trinidad, you
yeah,
know, and
yeah,
so it made me embrace it even more. And if I be honest, when I was a lot younger, when you were seeing me just
mm,
starting, to put on shows in Trinidad, um, I wanted to get out of Trinidad, right? And that was the advice I was getting from everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason was because of the challenge of the music industry and how
Mm-hmm.
the limited exposure and so on. But the moment I left Trinidad, I began to develop much more of an appreciation for where I grew up, the
Mm-hmm.
people I had access to there, the sense of community, the
Mm-hmm.
culture, the food, everything, you know.
Yes, yes.
So that's where the nostalgia comes from, and I'm also seeing how I, as a Trinidadian, have a unique perspective on the world that I can also share with people as well.
Critical because of us being Caribbean people. You
Yeah,
see that in terms of the kind of modern history of Caribbean Americans in the United
yeah,
States, in terms of
yeah,
their role, in terms of developing, civil rights and that kind of stuff.
yeah,
But just that simple fact of us being in a country, we can
yeah,
have a female prime minister or a black commissioner of police, and
yeah.
you go to a country where that is like a novel thing in the 1980s, 90s, and
Right.
2000s, right?
Yeah,
Those are the kind of things, so that we view simple things completely differently,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
I think that is so important, right?
yeah.
um, as I said, I think what you're doing in terms of the Kaiso Street Society, in terms of developing a kind of awareness of the music that we have, kind of revitalizing an
Mm-hmm.
interest in heritage, and I keep
Yeah,
using this word in terms of legacy, I
yeah,
think it's so important. And
for sure.
again, kudos to you for that. But I'm
Yeah.
also aware
Mm-hmm.
that you're also a recording artist, so it's not
Yes,
like you're not stuck in one space. You've
for
also
sure.
been exploring music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I do remember some years ago, what year was it? What year was it that you released Bridges? What year did you release?
That was 2020 actually.
2020, middle of
Yeah.
COVID. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
COVID
Mm-hmm.
was a creative time for a number of people.
Yeah.
But your approach to the music was a kind of unique way, in
Mm-hmm.
that you dealt with a heritage instrument
Yeah.
of Tobago,
Mm-hmm.
and utilize that and fuse it with your understanding of jazz, and certainly the years that you spent in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
that development over these 14, 15 years ago when I first met you,
Yeah.
to create something brand new.
Mm-hmm.
What was the genesis? What was your thinking that, okay, I'm going to create a Caribbean jazz record, or I'm just going to
Yeah.
create a jazz record,
Yeah.
but let me utilize this instrument that's kind of semi unknown
Yeah.
to Trinidadians and the rest of the world?
Well, I mean, the idea of Bridges, the name of the record came about when I was walking to school when I was at Humber College one morning,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Yes.
was cold, and there was this record I would listen to a lot called Stars and Stripes by Kenny Garrett,
Mm-hmm.
and a song came on. The name of the song was Lago, like the musical term Lago,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, I was listening to the melody. I'm like, this is We Are the World, Michael Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
but it was called Lago. And I know that
Mm-hmm.
that was something that a lot of jazz musicians did, at one point, where they would play a popular song but call it something else to get past.
Yeah, they use the musical bed and just improvise over the
Exactly.
top or something. So yes.
Yeah. So I had this thought. I was, here I was a Trinidadian on Canadian soil listening to a jazz musician play a pop musician's tune, and the thing that was connecting everything was just good music, right? And it
Always.
was a bridge. All right, the good
Mm-hmm.
music was the bridge, and so I was already writing music, and I knew I wanted to record this record, and so the idea of bridges was kind of the central idea. But I was like, a bridge goes two ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm kind of searching, reaching into this new music that I had fell in love with in my late teens, jazz and
Mm-hmm.
and Black American music,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, but I come from somewhere. I need something to ground what I was doing, and I had already started research on tambourine and fell in love with the music.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting how that happened because had heard a record from one of my favorite saxophonists and composers, Miguel Zenon from Puerto Rico,
Yes.
and lives in New York. And that record is called Esta Plena, or This Is Plena.
Mm-hmm.
The folk from
The folk form of Puerto
from
Rico, yeah.
yeah. So it's a wonderful drum and dance tradition, and they play like 3 frame drums.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I was like, wait, this song's familiar to something I heard in Grenada, where my granddad is from, on the island of Carriacou,
Mm-hmm.
called Big Drum.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, but wait, there's also this thing in Tobago called tambourine that play free drums. So it was like, this kind of full circle moment. And so I think I started to research tambourine somewhere around 2010, 2012, like right
Okay.
before I had left Trinidad. And I started sending emails to people like, tell me about this tradition, and nobody could really tell me anything about it. Like even the musicologists of the time, they were like, talk to that person, because I don't really know. So I just read a couple articles online and I started transcribing the rhythms and all of that. So I wanted to include this tradition on the album as something that's indigenous to Trinidad and Tobago, right? It's
Yes.
I mean, it's really indigenous to Tobago
Bagel.
specifically. Even the drum, the wood that they used comes from a tree that's only found
Only in Tobago.
in
Yeah.
Tobago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of the thing that I used to ground what I was doing, and I also just fell in love with the music and wanted to bring it forward and just really share that love with people.
Got you.
Yeah.
As I said, I did review the record when it came out for Caribbean Beat magazine. Shameless
Yeah.
plug. And it was relatively unique. I don't know if your record came out before John Arnold, who's Tobago's cornerstone.
It did come out before John Arnold. As a matter of fact, John Arnold was very instrumental in connecting me to the tambourine players. So I went to Tobago in 2019, and I spent a day with them, with Wax, the fiddle player, and a couple of the. I worked with the Mount Coolin tambourine band. Spent a day with them, talking about the rhythms, recording all of the rhythms. John was the one that helped organize that, and he was telling me that, hey, this needs to happen more. And he was already, I think, ideating that project. So, but my had come out before his.
Had come out before us, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the nature of business.
Absolutely.
You lose, right?
But you know what? I think it's important because, this is another point. Like, and I think this is also I think it's a colonial thing too. Like, with the idea of crossover is this idea of like having the token person. Like, one person must win. I have to get that thing out first, and I have to be the guy. I am so anti that idea, because if you look again across the French and Spanish speaking, diaspora, almost every single jazz musician from the Spanish speaking Caribbean, they have like a rumba project or a Latin jazz or multiple, right?
Multiple, yes.
Right. So Miguel Zenon has a planar project. David Sanchez has a planar project. So more to add to the canon of music.
And I'm happy that you're adding to the canon of music.
Yeah.
Just out of personal curiosity, you heard the tambourine drum. Did you ever think about utilizing the steel pan in any of your compositions and recordings?
Yeah, I mean, I have another project I'm working on with the Kaiso Street Society, and the hope is to get the steel pan on that. I have a very I write in a very specific kind of sonic way, and so I'm very cautious about which instruments I introduce where. But yeah, I love steel pan. Actually, steel pan is actually my first instrument. I started playing it around 8 years old.
There you go. And when did you pick up the saxophone?
Around on the age of 14 years old. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's it. Now that's your career. It's alto or tenor?
I mean, I play alto and soprano. Those are my ones. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's cool. In terms of your continued recording career, because I know that you're going to be working a lot with the Kaiso Street Society in terms of developing that framework for the kind of dissemination of calypso and its heritage, as well as its fusion. Are you making any current recordings? Are you doing any other recordings beyond the Bridges album?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier on, and the birth of the Kaiso Street Society was the Kaiso Street Collective, which happened in 2023. That was the ensemble that I put together on Nonet. We just recorded our debut album in May of this year, and that album is going to be out in February 2026. And we're also working on a documentary, a short documentary. The album is called, I don't want to give out the title just yet, but it's
it does that orient around calypso?
It's my grandfather's music. I took a couple of my grandfather's tunes and rearranged them. It's really a modern jazz record. And the approach that we've taken is really inspired by the work of the SF Jazz Collective. They've been doing this project where they take
composers,
right? Legendary composers, and they rework that person's exactly. So we've done that because calypso, there's enough authentic calypso. There's enough melodic, harmonic
Mhm.
content, and even
Mhm.
the stories, the things they're talking about. There's enough content there to write in a thematic way, even if you don't have
Yeah,
the lyrics.
I
So,
got you.
yeah,
I don't want to be comparing you to other musicians, but Etienne Charles, of course, yeah, some years ago made a record called Kaiso,
yeah,
where he did the music of Roaring Lion, Kitchen, and Sparrow. And I think
mm-hmm.
he just included one original composition,
Yeah,
but rearranged it to get a broader understanding of the power and the majesty, to use Ralph Robertson's phrase, the
absolutely.
majesty of Calypso.
Mm-hmm.
And you are doing this, of course, utilizing your grandfather's music.
Yeah.
I look forward to that. I mean, of course, when I heard February, I thought, oh, he's releasing it for Carnival. But there again, with my small mind, you're releasing it in February in Canada, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, I don't
It has
think
nothing to do with our Carnival per se.
well per
The
se. I
timing
mean,
maybe, yeah, but
well, here's the thing. I mean, I've always acknowledged that African Heritage History History Month, or Black History Month, as we say,
yeah.
coincides with Carnival
Hmm.
in Trinidad,
Hmm.
and I think that's a interesting diasporic connection, right?
Okay.
Because of what calypso means to us. Calypso is heritage, right? Our heritage, and really remembering the contributions of
Hmm.
Afro Trinidad, Afro the slaves, right, in
Yes.
Trinidad.
Hmm.
So I think it's a really important connection. I actually will be in Trinidad
Hmm.
to promote the documentary and the release of the record at the end of January, February next year.
In time for that thing. Okay. Well,
Exactly.
there's a Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival that's literally happening next week. If the project, the documentary is ready, I mean, it will be released in February, but there's
February.
always the idea of taking that and utilizing it in film festivals regionally and of course internationally.
Absolutely.
Because I
Absolutely.
think, as I said, modern people making the work of legacy development, I think it's so important. It can't be
Yeah.
left to people in the 60s and 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you're doing, and of course, infusing with that kind of modern notion of what legacy is, of course,
Yeah.
utilizing a little bit of calypso jazz and a little bit of re-recording and the idea of playlists and that kind of stuff. It's
Yeah.
a new way, a novel way of thinking about how to maintain the music, right? And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
so important. I do hope that you are able to allow that music to be spread widely in the diaspora so that you have some kind of commercial connection in Trinidad
Right.
so that you can actually get this music to be heard widely
Yeah.
by a
Yeah.
broad audience. There's a kind of faddishness about things that are quote unquote highbrow, but it starts somewhere. If you get them at an early age, 10 years later, they might say, "I want no pop music. I want no disco. I want to hear calypso as it was." I'm
Absolutely.
shameless plug once again, as people know, I put on Jazz Artists in the Greens,
Mm-hmm.
and the show we had our 20th edition this year,
Yeah.
and Jesse performed
I
along
was
with
there.
Lionel Lewis. He was there, right? And one of the things that I am aware of, you kind of look at the audience and say, well, these people are now 20 plus years older, right? But there are also younger people coming in, and they told me the reason they got into this because that this is not a joke. They were 20 years old when they went and see you all at a Casa de Visa. And now that they're older, they say, "Oh, I want to hear no soca and that kind of stuff. I want to hear something different," right? And they're now getting hip back
That's so
once again
funny.
to
Yeah.
the idea of, well, let's just sing them. My parents used to go to it, like, it's probably a different thing. So
Yeah.
there's a kind of a maturity that comes, and a
Yeah.
kind of liking of music, to use a simple phrase. I like the
Yeah.
music because it's more mature, it's more complex,
Mm-hmm.
it's more cerebral as it was.
Yeah.
And at the same time, just out of curiosity again, in terms of, because one of the things that happens here in terms of Trinidad and our music is the idea of celebration. So that when we play music, there's a kind of insistence by an audience, some audience members, and have to be able to dance, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the music that you're creating, because I heard a whisper somewhere along that you also may be putting out a Christmas record,
Yes,
right?
I am.
Is there kind of notion of celebration in your music? Is celebration part of what calypso music, part of what your development of as an artist? Is that part of what you do?
Always, always. And I would say this. I'll again take a detour back to answering this question, because we've talked about the
Chatting,
idea
chatting, chatting.
of calypso jazz,
Mm-hmm.
um or jazzifying calypso, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a notion that I kind of reject in a sense, because calypso and jazz are two sides of the same coin, in my opinion. Like the way that calypso developed, um was very much influenced by jazz, and I'm talking about calypso, not Kaiso jazz that happened a
Mm-hmm.
little
Yeah.
later, right? The melodic content, the harmonic content of calypso, and we were also taking in, you know, what was happening around the world, like what
Yeah.
was happening
In
in
Harlem.
jazz in Harlem, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There was travel, right, and then we were also taking in what was happening in Latin America, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in Trinidad, one thing about Trinidad is that we've always concerned ourselves with what's happening, in the metropolitan spaces and across the Caribbean, for better or for worse at times,
Yeah, very much
right?
so. Yeah, correct.
Right.
Very much so. Mm-hmm.
So for me, Kaiso jazz or calypso jazz is really an instrumental interpretation of a calypso. So like
Calypso.
if you listen to all, like, the 60s was that era of like the combo bands. If you
Mm-hmm.
listen to those combo bands, they sound like jazz bands,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And it's
very much so.
because the soloists and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the arrangers were jazz musicians,
Yeah.
and if they weren't necessarily practicing jazz musicians, the arrangers that is, they were learning
Mm-hmm.
from jazz musicians how to write the music. So a lot my research right now is actually on, my academic research specifically is on arrangers in calypso, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those, like, arrangers are the silent architects of the
Yes.
music, right? A lot of them were jazz musicians or paying attention to
Mm-hmm.
those type of trends, right? So for me, the content is the same. So um, it's so easy to play a calypso in a jazz style because
Mm.
it's
It's
already
there.
there. So
Yeah.
bringing back to going back to your question into this idea of celebration. When I listen to a record um like Kaiso,
Mm-hmm.
not Etienne's Kaiso, but Sil Dobson, but John Body Williams
Mm-hmm.
Kaiso, that
Mm-hmm.
record, there's a true spirit of calypso, but there's
Mm-hmm.
also a spirit of celebration. You can hear it in the music. You can hear it as a space of a big group of musicians coming together and enjoying making music,
Mm-hmm.
music that we love, and that reflects us and sounds like us in a
Yes.
space. So that's really what I want to do with the music that I'm doing right now. So yes, there is always a celebration element.
That's wonderful.
Sometimes less overt
Mm-hmm.
than
Than other
a
times.
fete,
Yeah,
right?
well, yeah. Like the fat is the extreme.
Right.
We invent fat. But I'm happy you mentioned the idea of the musicians because what my research, the music when Kitchener got to England in '48 and he did his first recordings, the musicians who were playing, even ones who were like Nurse and these other musicians,
Yeah,
Ross Henderson, these fellas,
yeah,
they were jazz musicians, right?
absolutely,
The
absolutely.
musicians who played with Clark and these fellas who were backing Roaring Lion and Attila Hunt,
Hmm.
they were
They
like
were
jazz bands.
they were
That's
jazz
what it was, right?
musicians.
Right. And
Yeah,
somebody may have had some Americans who basically said, listen, I just need a gig. I'm a jazz musician. This is a chart. I play.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
So the idea of, as you're right in a sense, well, not in a sense, you're correct. That calypso and jazz, my thinking as a kind of non-musicologist is
hmm,
New Orleans and Port of Spain were basically very sister cities with very similar histories in terms
yeah,
of the invasion and who's the colonizer and who was and the slave and what the music they created.
yeah,
And although jazz had some elements of Afro-Caribbean music in terms of the genesis and thing, basically New Orleans created jazz by incorporating European music and of course African rhythms. We
hmm,
created calypso. I think our stories were critical to it. Certainly the
hmm,
African rhythms were important. And so
hmm.
calypso was words, as I keep saying, whereas jazz was music, right? But
Right,
you're right. They were the same thing, start from the same seed, and they spread
absolutely.
out. And because we're in basically in different spaces within the Americas,
Yeah,
we had different space. We ended up in different places.
yeah,
Um, I am. I'm kind of. We're wrapping up our conversation as we come to hear that. But I'm just keen to understand or to hear in
yeah,
terms of the development of you as a musician.
hmm,
Um, in terms of your recordings, because I'm hearing a Christmas album, I'm also hearing a Carnival album, a Kaiso album, let's call it that for the time
yeah,
being, next February. So that's like two records within a space of months.
yeah,
What does the future hold? And you also said that you're doing some teaching at Humber College.
yeah,
What does the future hold for Jesse Ryan in terms of recording industry, in terms of a composer, in
yeah.
terms of a arranger? What does that future look like?
Well, I've always been passionate about writing, and I've multiple projects that I'm working on to be released over the next couple of years. I'm working on a subsequent tambourine project,
Mm,
that's going to focus, that's going to really focus on not just using tambourine as an extra layer to the music, but as the foundation for the
mm,
composition. So I've already started working on that and working with a dancer here in Toronto, Trinidadian dancer Julia Cato,
mm.
to develop the dance element. So that not so much develop, but to actually learn the tradition. Because when I was in Tobago in 2019, I realized that the performance of the drummers is always tied to the dancers. Right? There's
Oh,
a movement, rhythmic
mm,
language that happens
mm.
between the drum and dancers. So
It's like the
I think that
calendar and the script
exactly,
writer. Okay.
exactly.
Mm,
There's a language that if you remove the dancers,
mm.
the music doesn't actually reach its peak, right?
Oh, interesting. Very
Um,
interesting. Mm,
so I'm working on another family project. I'm working on a project that isn't necessarily uh, a Caribbean project, but it's probably one of my most important things I'll ever do. It's really, as you may know, Nigel. I grew up in the church in Trinidad,
yes. Yeah.
right? And so this project is more transcendent ideas, and it's a collaboration with the Nathaniel Debt Chorale, which is a 20 voice chorale here in Toronto. Actually,
Mhm.
it's the first Afrocentric chorale in Canada.
In Canada. Okay. Wonderful.
So it's excuse me, Nathaniel Debt Chorale, string quartet, and my quintet, and
Mm.
that's happening. Well, the premiere of that suite is called the Virtue Suite. Is happening in February 2026, and
You're
subsequent
busy.
record. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The the a subsequent record will happen for that, and then of course just continuing the work of Kaiser Street Society. We have a huge vision, and we're
Mm.
just starting the work, and so, this is a call. I want to put a call out to anybody watching this podcast. If
Watching.
you align with what we're doing, you're in academic research, you're in funding for arts organizations, you're in um, whatever space you are that's aligned with what we're doing, please feel free to reach out.
Mm.
And besides that, continuing to put all my records under my own name
Yeah, give us your
as well.
socials now so people can know who to contact. What's your social account?
Absolutely. So you
Mm.
can reach me at Jesse Ryan, JesseRyan, Sax, SAX, Jesse Ryan Sax, on
Mm.
all socials. Kaiser Street Society at Kaiser Street Society.
Mm.
Kaiso Street
Society.
Society,
Yeah.
on all socials. And our website is kaiserstreetsociety.org.
.org. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Jesse Ryan, pioneer in a sense. I say in a sense because you're not 70 years old, but you're doing things that could and should have been done before. But I think importantly, you're doing the things now,
Hmm.
and you have a body of work in terms of understanding what Kaiso is. You have a heritage that says I'm
Yeah.
a Kaisonian, but
Yeah.
critically, you also understand what native music is in terms of native instruments and that how it works well with the modern ideas of jazz and that kind of stuff, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
It's important that young musicians understand that the world is a large world, and as much as our music industry locally may be a nice idea, our
Yeah.
reality is that we have to find a way to get out there or collaborate. And
Yeah.
because of this modern technology, I don't think it's very difficult for an artist resident in Trinidad to collaborate with you out in Toronto.
Absolutely.
So, so that the idea of connection and collaboration, I think, is something that is necessary in terms of our development and in terms of the development of this music that I like, called island
Hmm.
jazz or calypso jazz as it was.
Hmm.
Jesse, I want to thank you for your time, but more importantly, I want to thank you for your vision and your continued work that you're doing, because I think it's so important from a old man to hear the kind of thing that you're doing now, knowing that Jesse played at my birthday party.
Man. Woo.
It's just saxophone and djembe. I think that's all he
Yeah,
had
yeah,
at the
yeah.
time.
That's what it
Yeah, yeah.
was.
Yeah, but I'm really, really happy that you're doing this kind of work because I think the work of the Kaiso Street Society, I think, is important. I keep saying it
Mhm.
over and over again. that notion of legacy is something that we, at our peril, we lose.
Yeah.
People have to have the stories. People have to keep the stories. People have to write the stories, and of course, utilizing film, of course, with digital technology, whatever.
Yeah.
But in terms of also having a band, Kaiso Collective, give me the Kaiso Street Collective,
Kaiso Street Collective, exactly. And we
Kaiso
have
Street
another
Collective.
project called uh, Kai, we have another project called the Kaiso Street Legacy Band, and the goal of that band is to take legacy moments or legacy events and bring it forward, reimagine it.
Boom. You see what I mean? And listen. I don't need to stop the conversation now because I'm not thinking. All right, we
We could
continue.
talk about it if you want. Like, so we launched that
Let's
project
tell me about
February.
that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Tell me about that
So we
project.
launched a project in February of this year for Black History Month, right?
Mhm.
And it was a collaboration with Jazz FM 91 here in Toronto. It was a live to air performance,
Okay.
and basically what we did, and it is like we're basically launching a much larger project in phases. So the launch of this project was the first phase, sort of like a proof of concept of the musical part of it. Where
Yes.
the next phase is to use that performance to secure funding for a large scale theatrical performance.
Mm.
And so the legacy event that we're remembering is the very first Caribana that happened in Center Island. So basically, we're taking the set list from that concert and we're reimagining it
Jesus.
and writing a theatrical
Wow.
production
Wow.
around that event, right? And this is the event that my grandfather is listed. His song is listed as the last song on the record, but people
Mm-hmm.
say he actually didn't
You
make it.
didn't
But
turn up.
he did. Well, I'm not sure if he didn't turn up or if I just didn't. I'm not sure. I need to get the story
But
about what actually
what?
happened.
So what did they record then? They recorded him in a studio after or something.
No, so here's the thing. So I've been trying to get my hands on the record. I haven't gotten the record as yet, but somebody who has the record told
Mm-hmm.
me that they listened to it and his song is listed as the last song on the record, but it's not on the record.
Oh, he's not. You don't hear his voice. You
You
don't
don't
hear.
hear it. You don't hear it.
Ah.
So and there was and I read two different newspaper articles. One said he performed and one
Mm.
said he didn't
He
perform,
didn't perform.
right?
Wow.
And the thing is, I have a feeling like if he did perform, because the one that said he performed gave details about
Mm-hmm.
the performance and said that there was a lot of rain and he eventually performed just as the rain was subsided. So I'm like, it has to have happened,
Yeah,
right?
it probably did happen, but
Right?
I'm
Yeah.
I'm surprised that the person said this on the record, but they're not seeing it they're not hearing it on the record. That is
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah, it's an
And
interesting thing. So
and
yeah, so the
you search the internet because everything now is on the internet and nothing is
exactly.
there.
Nothing is there that confirms. The one thing I haven't done is spoken to the people that were actually
I'm not
there.
gonna say
I
they may be
know
older, but yeah, somebody was there.
for sure. Dr. Rita Cox was one of the persons who was part of the. I think she was part of both of the Caribbean Planning Committee for Expo 67, as well
Mm-hmm.
as the first Caribana
Caspar Manor. Okay.
67 committee. So
Mhm.
she would know. I have to ask her.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
really great stuff. I mean, the
yeah,
idea of a larger theatrical again. As I said, I was in university in Canada in 1984, and it was an eye opener. I come from Trinidad. They think you know the world. You go there, and then they realize, oh, there's a much larger world, and that's just
yeah,
Toronto,
yeah,
because there are other spaces all globally that probably exceeded what I was looking at in Toronto at that time.
yeah.
But the idea of having the grand vision is something I've always been impressed with, right? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
gonna lie to him. I'm a fan of. I call his name already, but he uses what I call intelligence in terms of his compositions, in terms of the development of his work and that kind of stuff. And it's
Mm-hmm.
something I'm a fan of.
Mm-hmm.
Intelligence, right?
Yeah,
In terms of you're smart, you do research, and then you write music that shows beyond the kind of skill and the kind of understanding of theory of music,
yeah,
but understanding the story that makes the music have an impact and have
for
an
sure.
impact on audiences
Well,
globally, including on mine.
that's the spirit of the Kaisonian,
See what I mean? There you go.
right? So I mean, if you look at academically, a lot of the Calypsonians, they may not have had degrees and
They didn't have
masters and
degrees. Yeah,
doctorates and
correct,
all of that, but
correct.
they were highly intelligent,
Very much
full
so.
of wit and understood the world
Mhm.
in a deep way and was able to comment on
Mm.
on world events and social
Anything.
events,
Yeah.
right? Anything really, right?
Anything. Mm.
And improvise
Mm-hmm.
lyrics on the spot. This idea of extemporization
Mm-hmm.
was very common to, the early cohort of calypsonians. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
them did it. Right? That was the way,
Yeah,
right?
quite true. Quite true.
So it takes high intelligence and skill to be able to do that. And um, I feel proud to be connected to that tradition through my granddad,
Mm-hmm.
and and I feel, and it's something that I want to carry on. Right? I don't necessarily think I'm unique in that way. Like Trinidad is a country of intellects, right?
That
Um,
our gift to I think our gift to the world is our minds and our words. That's
there
my
we go.
saying. That
There we
what
go.
we've written and the brilliant minds. That's our gift to the world from Trinidad and
Yeah,
Tobago.
but that
And
that
you are,
isn't always portrayed in the media. Like if you think of calypso, then the international notion of what calypso is jam and wine and party music, but calypso is music for social change.
yeah, but well, Belafonte was a man who was about the activism of social change, but he
Yeah,
also made calypso generic. But hey, what are you gonna do? He's a,
right,
I wrote
right.
about, I had to write an obituary on him when he
Yeah,
passed. And those are the two angles. The editor wanted something about attacking the idea that he, took people's music and
yeah.
changed their name. That happened, but later in
Mm.
his career, he corrected it. He put the actual composer's proper name. So Kitchener's
Well, I
name
mean,
was
it
there. King
was
Radio's name was there. Lord Melody's name. They
he
got their
he
name when they
recorded one
credit.
of my grandfather's calypsos too
There.
in
And but
1961. He
but did
recorded Gloria.
he put his name? Did he put your grandfather's name as a composer?
I don't know if it was corrected, but on the
No.
original line and notes, you can go online and find it right now. He was his name was spelled like he'd call him something else.
But he admitted,
I,
Belafonte admitted that a calypsonian sang it first.
Oh yeah, for sure. There was there's a news article I just saw a little while
Mm.
ago where they was talking about Belafonte using his song. There's Belafonte and there's my grandfather's face talking about him
Mm.
singing over my grandfather's
Yeah.
um song. But yeah,
Mm.
calypso in itself. I mean, I don't necessarily think that. And again, every time I talk about Harry Belafonte, I say it carefully because I have an enormous amount of respect for
Mm.
what he did and
What
his
he did.
legacy in terms of advocacy.
Mm.
He was great friends. I mean, some people say best friends with Martin Luther King,
Martin Luther King Jr. was his
right?
yes. Yeah. Mm.
And funded a big portion of the civil rights movement through what calypsos, right?
Calypso's,
Through
yes.
performance, right?
Performances, yeah, yes.
Performances, right? So calypso was juxtaposed to the civil rights movement through the work of Harry Belafonte, right?
Hmm.
I mean, some people might say that happened long before that, within the Harlem
Yeah.
Renaissance and
Hmm.
all of that. But yeah, for sure.
What he was doing, I think, as I said, the advocacy and the activism is as important to what he did to to put calypso into the consciousness of an American population.
Yeah,
Our maybe our artists did not benefit from it fully, which is unfortunate.
yeah,
But I think it that word calypso, a lot of Americans still say Harry Belafonte when they say the word calypso,
for
and I
sure.
hope in the future that when they say the word calypso, they say Jesse Ryan.
Well,
Jesse.
here's the thing. Here's the thing, Adrian. I had the opportunity to speak at York University last year,
Mhm.
um, and it was a sort of phenomenological framework I developed to speak about calypso, right? And
Mhm.
it was called the framework is called the ethos of calypso because as a musician, we're accustomed to interacting with the music from the musical perspectives, but I
Mhm.
was interested in the sort of phenomenological part of the music. What calypso as a phenomenon? What
Mhm.
is it, and
Mhm.
why did it become so influential, not just in Trinidad but across the world during that the 50s, 60s, that calypso craze that happened in the
Yeah,
US?
late 50s, yeah, 57, 56, 57. Go ahead.
Exactly. So the first version of the lecture was called Calypso Beyond Belafonte, and I
Mhm.
was like, you know what? I don't want to knock his legacy. My perspective on his legacy is shifting and developing, and so
Mhm.
it's called now Calypso, redefining Calypso's legacy as music for social change,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the framework is that there's four pillars to what Calypso is, right? There's the ethos of what Calypso is that it comes from social bonding, right? When
Mm-hmm.
you go back to the experience of the slaves, many different tribes, right? They didn't all come from the same place, but they had a shared experience, and
Mm-hmm.
the very early experiences that they actually would sing together to make the
Mm-hmm.
work easier. They didn't
Easier.
allow them to speak on the
Mm-hmm.
when they were working on the out in the field,
Plantations.
right? So you have social bonding happening around these musical experiences, and of course other shared experiences. And then out of that, you have identity formation, right? And then out of that identity formation, you have collaboration and cooperation that can happen out there, which is what we see around the Cambole riots and so on. And then the resistance. And the resistance sometimes was violent,
Mm-hmm.
but we have much more of a history of non-violent resistance in the form of music and
Mm-hmm.
advocacy. The job of the calypsonian was to resist with words and to fight with words. I mean, it's in the notion of just the calendar as well, the stick fighting and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But the calypsonian was actively fighting against the oppression of the colonialists
Mm-hmm.
at the time. So share and then those musical experiences bring the whole thing back to uh, the social bonding that happens from these musical experiences that we have, right? So for me, my part of my vision too is like the spirit of calypso. Like one of the most Trinidadian things I've ever experienced is sitting in a room and people singing calypsos together. No script.
Yes. Yeah,
Calypso
yeah.
here, and then somebody
Yeah,
start
yeah.
up another one and a
Mm-hmm.
bottle and spoon. Kind of what we
Portland Spoon.
experience, when we had that show, the impromptu show.
At the impromptu show, yeah. And
Exactly.
people just started to sing. Yes, I remember it at the jazz cafe, not cafe, jazz, not the jazz room, ethnic jazz
There
space.
we
Let's
go. Actually, Active
yeah.
Jazz Club. I'm forgetting.
Club, ethnic jazz club. That's
Right.
it. Yeah,
Shout out to Chantel.
Chantal Esdale, yeah.
Yeah.
Shout out.
So for me, yeah,
Mhm,
that spirit of calypso, that spirit of community, the spirit of resistance, the spirit of looking back at where we've come from and then looking forward. Where are we going? That's
mhm,
the spirit of calypso, and that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this. Not just because of the music, but I think there's something phenomenological about calypso in itself. And if my generation and previous generations could acknowledge that and
mhm.
pay attention to it, we can forge a much better path forward for Trinidadians and the diaspora moving forward.
Jesse Ryan, ladies and gentlemen, from Toronto, genius, academic, musician, jazz musician, island jazz musician, Kaiso activist, Kaiso Street Society leader, founder, developer. And I think, as I said, one of those fine young minds that is important to take music from the Caribbean forward. There's this kind of phenomenon in terms of literature and publishing where every Caribbean author now has to have a master's degree. Doesn't have to have, but those who get published always have a master's degree, right? I'm not necessarily saying that every musician has to have a master's degree, but intelligence, whether it's native intelligence or academic intelligence, is so important. And what I've gathered in our conversation is you have it in bucket loads. Jesse, thank you very much. Thank
Thank
you
you,
very
Nigel.
much. Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
very much. All the best to you in the future.